Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
3 a.m. and I was sweating like a feral hog in a sauna. Kansas in August can be like another day in the bowels of hell. Except in hell the help is nicer, and the head honcho has some style. You won't see any 300-pound dipshits wearing dirty overalls strolling the flaming streets of purgatory. I was somewhere over the Oklahoma-Kansas border, sitting at a window table in Aunt Daisy's cafe. The dusty formica table had one leg propped up by what looked like a petrified muskrat. Aunt Daisy smelled of diesel and piss. At least I hoped it was Daisy that reeked, not me. By the cash register, there was a jar with a set of dentures in it. They didn't appear to be Daisy. When she smiled, you could see she had at least half her teeth. I assumed they were hers from the various shades of brown and green. I'd driven up from Juarez through dust storms, flash floods, and swarms of giant locusts. 30 sleepless hours in a piece of shit, big rig, with no air, no shocks, and a rock-hard seat for my fat hemorrhoidal ass. It was a biblical enough scene that I'd taken to passing the time shouting the fat man's version of the Book of Revelation in my best tent revival preacher voice. Both were flung alive into a lake of fire, burning with the flesh of 1,000 BBQ'd ribs. Amen, sister. A few times on the drive, it seemed my unholy cargo was shouting Bible verses along with me. Old Slimo didn't have the nuance needed to enthrall the wicked and weak, but he sure as hell had the volume. Scared the shit out the old bat in the wood-paneled station wagon. Her eyes were huge, her hands at 10 and 2 as we blew by in a hellish roar. Looking in the cracked side mirror, I watched her. She didn't slow down, just stayed on the straight and narrow as the highway started a big turn on its way over the river. The bug-eyed dame just held on tight and slammed through the railing, sailing into the raging water below. As she hit the water, I was thinking, wonder if all those pink curlers will help her float. While I'd managed to get Slimo back from the clutches of the CIA, I had no plan on what to do with a howling shithead now. Here I was, sitting in a broken-down cafe in the middle of the American wasteland, with a barely functioning 18-wheeler parked in the alley and a mutant beast locked in the trailer. I'd abandoned Ruby to the CIA goons, and Homer was adrift somewhere in the Sea of Cortez. Maybe I should send an apology to the authorities for whatever hell Ruby was unleashing upon them, ditch the howling beast in an alley, and send an anonymous tip to the Mexican Navy. Dear Admiral Hombre, approach the drifting trawler with utmost care. The captain is dead and has no fear. He is well armed and traveling with a particularly vicious Albanian werewolf. Best of luck, a friend. No, I needed to play this out. All the way to the end. Slimo was my only bargaining chip. I needed him to get Ruby back, or at the least save her puny ass from certain torture. I couldn't be too sure she wasn't already spilling her guts to some pretty boy's secret agent. She seemed one tough gal on the outside, but I was pretty sure she would cave under any threat of pain. She wouldn't sell me out if she could avoid it. But if they started pulling out toenails and shit, anything could happen. When I drove into this pit of a town, I spotted a traveling carnival setting up in a field by the high school. The Jeremiah Traveling Carnival and Sideshow was infamous across the Bible Belt for the hideousness of its freaks, the crookedness of its games, and the venality of its employees. Most of their carnies came straight out of the best correctional institutions across the South. Seemed like a good place for me to do some business. I paid my bill and gave Aunt Daisy a tip. She smirked a bit and then slapped me hard across the face. I gave her a shiny dime instead. I piled back into the cab of my semi and drove over to the high school. Looking at the crumbling stone buildings, weed-covered fields, and razor wire-topped, rusty chain-link fence made me wonder if sweet Aunt Daisy had gone here. Probably learned her cooking skills and home economics and other life skills under the bleachers. Maybe her missing teeth were scattered about campus. My whole life, I've kept my eye out every time I visit a traveling circus or carnival, vigilantly walking the sideshows where I'd stare down every freak I saw, trying to divine some kinship, I guess. Problem was, I'd see part of me in everyone. Lobster boy, half man, half woman, the human rubber band, the world's smallest woman, world's fattest private eye. As I strolled through the rain-soaked field where Jeremiah's was setting up, I was trying to come up with the perfect spiel. The world's largest larva, worm boy, the amazing singing slug. None seemed right, so I kept thinking, which is most likely why I didn't see this steaming pile of elephant shit until I planted my big boot smack in the middle of it. Looking on the bright side, at least I didn't have my flip-flops on. My mood soured by the unfortunate pile that was now stuck to my foot. I really didn't appreciate the pimply-faced beanpole parolee-looking asshole who decided to laugh at my misfortune. You think that's funny? Best thing I seen today, but then it's still early. It didn't help that his laugh was like a jackass had fucked a hyena and their evil offspring had a bagpipe for vocal cords. I sauntered over to Hyena Ass and politely requested he lick the shit off my boot. Not quite accurate. I threw him to the ground and shoved the bottom of my boot into his ugly mug. He tried to scream, but when your broken nose and mouth are full of elephant shit, it's hard to get anything out that doesn't sound like a hog snuffle. Just as I was getting ready for boot 2, a rotund official-looking fellow and 2 muscle-bound goons appeared. What in hell's name are you doing to poor old Fred? He offered to clean my boots. Muffle glurred. Fred gurgled, spitting out chunks of shit. See, he's doing fine. Fred, get your sorry ass out of here and go get cleaned up. The 2 goons moved in closer on each side of me. Look, mister, we don't want any trouble. Why don't you just turn around and leave? We'll forget all about it. What do you say? I looked like I was pondering his question, but was really sliding my trusty Polaroid out of my jacket pocket. I clicked it as soon as I had it out. Did you just take my picture? Yep. What the fuck for? It's for my brother-in-law. What? He's a proctologist. So fucking what? He collects pictures of assholes. I ducked and ran for the truck. I opened the driver's door, still huffing and puffing, and turned back toward where I'd run from. They were still there, pointing at me and laughing. I could have strolled to my truck. Hell, I could have stopped for tea for all they cared. Feeling less threatened, I went to check the back to see if Slimer was doing okay. At least, that's what I told myself. In reality, I just wanted to say hi and pet his slimy little snout. As I came around the rear of the semi, I saw the cargo door was unlocked. I panicked. I flung the door open and stared stupidly at an empty cargo bed. Well, almost empty, Slimo had left a steaming pile of crap right in the middle of the bed. Must have been Daisy's home cooking that upset his sensitive digestive system. My bargaining chip was gone. My truck smelled like Satan's own shitter. A giant mutant slug was on the loose in southern Kansas. And this fucking rain just wouldn't stop. Where to? Elena, the Lyft driver asked. Straight to the point, huh? Not even a sir or hello? Talk about fucking manners. Elena tensed up. She knew that voice, although when she turned, her amygdala hijacked her brain immediately. Shit, she squealed, quickly whirling around and flooring the accelerator. But the car didn't move, as the man had already engaged the parking brake beforehand. Then, a sudden pop made her jerk backward into her seat with a scream. It was her windshield-mounted phone, which exploded after a bullet was fired into it. Okay, she cried, surrendering with her jeans soaked in shame. And she wets herself, he boasted with hysterical laughter. Not such a tough kid after all, huh? What do you want? Was all she could stutter out. The phone, if you please. Mr. Black, her former automotive teacher from high school, replied. He was one of the many teachers she had roasted and pulled pranks on to avoid being bullied by other students. But he was rather unfazed by her antics compared to other teachers and would often have a wise comeback to set her straight and have the students laughing at her rather than the other way around, at least until her latest antic towards the end of her senior year. Elena immediately obeyed and handed him what was left of her phone. Samsung, huh? You know these tend to be quite explosive, Mr. Black said, tossing it out the window. He then ordered her to hand over her purse. I'm sorry, I really am. No, you're not, kid, Mr. Black said, pressing his gun against her side, making her flinch. Not yet, you're not. Elena gasped when she heard it click. But fortunately for her, the chamber was empty this time. Well, that's enough Russian roulette for now. He chuckled sarcastically. Head north onto the freeway. We're going for a drive. Elena tried to drive, but the car only revved in place again. Parking brake stupid. Seriously, who the fuck did you blow at the DMV to get your license anyway? Elena's face fumed with embarrassment. Do you drive this slow with all your customers? It's a wonder you have a job at all. I'm trying to go the speed limit to not attract attention, okay? You're not even going the speed limit. Not that this piece of shit can accelerate worth a fuck anyway. Seriously, a Mitsubishi Mirage. You'd have to be huffing glue to think this was a good car to buy as a commuter. At 78 horsepower, it makes a Prius look like a race car. It gets 43 miles per gallon on the highway and 36 in the city. Ha ha. So, fucking what? A Prius can get 58 miles per gallon in the city and 53 miles per gallon on the highway. And best of all, doesn't take 13 fucking seconds to go 0 to 60. If you paid attention in class instead of being a little dipshit, you wouldn't have bought this shit box. Elena reached the exit for the freeway as he said this and pressed down hard on the accelerator, fueled by her anger. But the engine merely revved loudly as the car putted along, fueling Mr. Black's amusement. Told you it was a piece of shit. Talk about anticlimactic. You should have at least bought the 5-speed rather than settling for this continuously shitty transmission. Every word from him was dissolving what was left of her ego. She was getting roasted to shreds, and she knew if she talked back, he would pull out his gun again. The traffic lessened the further north they went, and he directed her to a local What a Burger. She had no idea what he had in mind, but at least this could buy her some time for now. When you pull up to the intercom, make sure my window is aligned with it. If you try giving them signals of any kind, it'll cost the cashier their life. Got that? Yes. Elena stumbled out. Welcome to What a Burger. How may we help you? Perhaps you can get my daughter to stop being a spoiled little shit for starters. That would certainly help me, Mr. Black said. This was followed with laughter on the other end. And how do you suppose we may do that, sir? The cashier chuckled. Give her a plain hamburger, nothing besides a dry, well-done patty and 2 buns. Half-assed, just like her effort at school. This was followed by more laughter on the other line. And what for you, sir? A medium sweet and spicy bacon burger so she can sit and stew with envy. Ah, perfect choice, sir. I'd be envious as well. Is there anything else you would like to order? Just 2 waters for us. That will be all. 3. Then they moved forward in line behind 2 other cars. Elena held her tongue, but her face burned with embarrassment the whole time. I'm really sorry for everything. I was just a kid that didn't know any better, Elena said as they waited. Well, welcome to adulthood, where actions have consequences. Elena gasped as an impatient horn blared from behind. Expect the world to wait for you, princess? Mr. Black piled on. She immediately drove to the window without saying a word. Mr. Black paid for and retrieved the food. Then they were on the road again. All that stood on both sides of the road were trees, with an occasional HPS street lamp to illuminate them, making Elena even more nervous. Where are we going? Just somewhere quiet for us to eat dinner. Please. I know you're mad at me for what I did in class, but can we work it out somehow? Shut up and drive. Elena swallowed her fear and continued on, but couldn't fight back the tears beginning to trickle down her face any longer. Take a right on the street ahead and drive until you reach the dead end, then park. She did as she was told, and after parking, she anxiously turned around to see him grinning at her. Are you crying? He snickered. No, she lied, sniffling, wiping her tears away. I knew you were soft, only acting tough in class to get attention. I said I was sorry, she whimpered. He tossed the bag with her half of the carry-out into her lap, then handed her a cup of water that came with it. So, what was your plan after graduating anyway? Shuttling around village drunkards from 6th Street. I'm not really sure what I plan to do yet. Of course you're not, because you spent your school years being a little dipshit instead of trying to learn something. I was bullied for being too quiet before my senior year, so I was only making jokes in class to stop it. I'm sorry some of them were at your expense. I really am. So, what you're really saying is that you treated your teachers like your bullies treated you, instead of standing up for yourself. Coward. A lump filled in Elena's throat. This meal felt like it would be her last. It seemed at this point she would not get any mercy from him, no matter what she said. She turned away and silently ate, starting to tear up again. A piece of her burger dropped onto her jeans, so she took a napkin out from her takeout bag. As she wiped over the stain it left, she pinched the napkin, taking hold of what was in her left pocket, a skill her father taught her when she was a kid. She kept a few with her everywhere she went after he passed away. With a click of her seatbelt release button, she immediately flung it at him, a throwing knife, which punctured into his right shoulder blade. Mr. Black cried out, firing a shot as Elena stumbled out the door with glass hailing on her. She quickly made a break for the woods as more shots rang through the air. "Get back here, you little shit," she heard him screech before tripping on a rock and collapsing into a patch of tall, dead grass. She quickly crawled behind a live oak tree with a thick trunk. "You think you won, haven't you, little piggy? But the big bad wolf is always 2 steps ahead." She heard his voice echo in the distance. Her stomach growled as her knees drew up to her chest. Running on a full stomach likely would take its toll on her. She looked up at the moon, illuminating the surrounding woodland of live oaks and ash junipers as she took deep breaths to calm herself. "I'm sure you remember the latest antic you pulled in my class as well as I do," his voice echoed. It took her a second as she tried her best to ignore the nuclear reaction beginning to radiate in her stomach, but she remembered. Mr. Black had left to use the restroom. She stood up to turn in a worksheet and slipped something into his unattended cup of coffee. After the argument they had the previous day, Elena was poised for vengeance. She had cracked a joke in class, and Mr. Black's patience with her had finally broke. "I wonder how your father would react if he saw what an insolent little snot you turned out to be," he had said. That had rendered her into a sullen silence the rest of that day. The school had quarantined me for 2 weeks, thanks to that. It was a precaution in case I had come down with measles. Now, talk about a load of shit. That little measles outbreak seems dull in comparison to our current pandemic, doesn't it? His voice had gotten closer, quicker than she had anticipated. "Speaking of a load of shit, I'm sure you're feeling rather queasy now, aren't you?" Elena's nerves went numb as a corpse. Her stomach growled impatiently, making her panic. This was a mistake. She never should have run out this far. Something suddenly rustled in the bushes nearby, and she made a break for it. But she screamed and fell backward when she saw a figure emerge just a few feet in front of her. "Here's Johnny, you little shit," Mr. Black yelled. He had heat-seeking goggles on, 2 steps ahead indeed. Elena's eyes grew wide, and her bowels released as he approached. "Sounds like someone needs their diaper changed." Warm sludge ran down her legs as she crawled backwards in fright. It wasn't long before she backed into a tree, startling herself. Her knees drew up to her chest. What was the plan here, really? Running into the woods on a summer night? You'd be dead within hours from dehydration after the laxatives do their work. "Your stupidity continues to amaze me," Mr. Black said. Elena swung at him with another knife from her pocket, but he caught her by the wrist. "One twist, and you'll lose your wrist. Get the gist?" he said with a grin. A desperate whimper escaped her mouth as she struggled to free herself. "Suit yourself," he said. She cried out and dropped the knife immediately, and he pinned her hand against the tree above her head. With his other hand, Mr. Black scooped up the knife from the ground. He rested the frigid blade against her stomach. "Please, you don't have to do this," Elena pleaded. "I wonder if the end is really like the story Tobias Wolff wrote, like memories unraveling themselves on a projector," Mr. Black said. "For what you fellas doing here on my land?" A voice boomed through the woods. Elena grimaced when she felt Mr. Black's knife press against her side, daring her to scream for help. A man with a black rancher hat emerged from the fog. Elena didn't recall seeing fog a moment ago. There must be a swamp nearby. This little dipshit thought she could bail on her Uber ride for free. Mr. Black said. That true, miss? The rancher asked. Elena's voice cracked when she tried to speak, and she swallowed hard. Sure smells like you scared her shitless, mister. Seems this generation ain't used to facing consequences for their crimes. Elena's stomach growled again, and she grimaced through the pain. She couldn't believe it. This man was actually taking Mr. Black's side. What's your name, miss? You're looking awfully pale there. Elena. She spoke hoarsely. Bill Jones, the rancher replied. And what be your name, mister? Mr. Black. I teach at a high school in town and drive for Uber in the summertime. And she was a student of yours, I take it? Heard you pitching a fit from miles away, Bill Jones said. A hiss from behind the oak tree startled Elena and Mr. Black. That there's my swamp puppy. He don't take kindly to trespassers, Bill Jones said, pulling out a revolver and thumbing the hammer back on it before Elena could blink. The alligator from behind the tree waited patiently with hunger. Put the knife down and be on your way, mister, Bill Jones said. Elena yelped when the knife sank into her thigh. The revolver struck Mr. Black with a bullet to the knee. He shrieked, and the alligator snagged him by his ankle. Elena's hand shakily reached for the knife. Keep the blade in, miss. Don't want you bleeding out like a Thanksgiving turkey, Bill Jones said, carefully picking her up. He walked her back to his cabin as Mr. Black wrestled his Glock 17 out of his pocket and fired at the alligator. With that, it let go and scampered off into the woods. Elena gasped when she heard the gunfire in the distance. Hold your water. He ain't going nowhere fast, Bill Jones said. Mr. Black crawled to a nearby live oak and rested his back against it. In his cabin, Bill Jones stitched up Elena's wound while she sat on the toilet, disregarding her pleas to be taken to a hospital instead. Drink your water and zip it, he snapped, startling her to silence. Now, stay put, miss. Won't be long. Bill Jones grabbed a wheelbarrow from the shed and pushed it through the woods. Nap time's over, Bill said, startling Mr. Black awake. Your pet lost his appetite, Mr. Black said. Didn't like the taste of lead, I reckon, Bill Jones said. Neither will you, Mr. Black replied, quickly taking out his Glock 17 and firing it. A cloud of fog exploded from the chest of Bill Jones. Bill inhaled the fog through his nostrils and grinned. Can't kill what's already dead, Jack, he said, revealing the scars on his chest from where he'd been shot in a previous life. Mr. Black emptied the magazine of his gun and was still clicking the trigger when the fog regenerated into the phantom standing before him. Cool it. You go and wake the neighbors, Bill Jones said, prying the gun from his hand and tossing it aside. He picked up Mr. Black by the collar of his shirt and dropped him onto the wheelbarrow. God damn it, Mr. Black cried out. He sure as shit ain't letting you in, Bill Jones said, but you can tell the devil who sent you. Get on up, miss. Got business to settle, Bill Jones said in the doorway. Elena winced as she stood up. She whimpered in pain and was covered in cold sweat after a few steps. You got stitches, so walk it off, miss, Bill Jones said. Elena gasped at the sight before her in the front yard. Mr. Black was standing on top of the wheelbarrow. His right leg was taking all the weight, while his left was disfigured from being shot, and his duel with the alligator. Wrapped around his neck was a rope. One shove of the wheelbarrow, and he was a goner. Anything y'all want to say before his sentence is carried out? Bill Jones asked. "Please don't do this," Elena said. "A sentence on this land cannot be revoked," Bill Jones replied. "When he disappears, you'll get the needle for my death, and I'll haunt you every day until then, you little dipshit." Mr. Black said to her with a grin, "And ghosts do exist. Just ask your friend before he hangs me." The moon shone through the oak trees, and the light only revealed 2 shadows instead of 3. Elena looked up at Bill, and her nerves went numb as a corpse. Those black eyes were not human. She yelped when she felt something cold touch her. Elena quickly whirled around. There were several familiar faces standing there who once went to the same high school as her. The last time she saw them were on missing posters hung throughout the school. "They've all been buried out here by this son of a bitch, polluting the land of the Jones family," Bill Jones said, looking up at Mr. Black. "Now you shall pay," he said, and shoved the wheelbarrow out from beneath him. Elena quickly pressed her hands over her ears when Mr. Black's neck snapped. She didn't bother looking up at him to confirm his death. They were all watching her now. Elena's skin went pale as the moonlight, and a frightened moan escaped her mouth, along with tears from her eyes. "About time you went on your way, miss. This land ain't for the living," Bill Jones said, making the body shudder. It may have been summer, but the air felt like it dropped well below freezing. The alligator sauntered toward her, rousing a startled gasp out of her. It followed as she limped through the woods until making it back to the road. In the grass, it watched her, ensuring she would neigh.
Chapter 1: Whispers of the Pines. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the warm pavement of Main Street. To anyone passing through today, Elmswood appeared just as it always had, quaint and unassuming. A place where time hesitated to move forward, cradled in the embrace of towering pines that enveloped the town like a lush green blanket. But beneath the surface charm, an undercurrent of anxiety pulsed through the community, palpable even to the latest arrival. Clara Vale stepped out of her car, its tires crunching over gravel as she surveyed the surroundings. She adjusted her camera strap across her shoulder, glancing nostalgically at the worn leather notebook that lay open on the passenger seat. It was filled with half-formed ideas and scattered notes, but she had hoped that Elmswood would inspire her to take a leap in her story. What she had not anticipated, however, was the oppressive tension that clung to the air like fog, swirling around her with an unsettling weight. "Just a series of disappearances," she muttered to herself, a mantra of sorts that was meant to allay her own rising apprehension. The locals had spoken of it whenever she had interviewed them beforehand, half-hearted warnings disguised as quaint folklore. Missing persons, they'd said, were tied to the woods. They stumbled into the forest, never to return, and were only replaced by whispered discussions of urban legends rooted in ancient curses. Clara took a deep breath, stepped back, and allowed her gaze to lock onto the towering pines that loomed in the backdrop. They stood proud and ominous, shadows flickering among their gnarled branches like forgotten spirits. Perhaps the stories, the suspicions of the townsfolk, were little more than an excuse to rationalize the inexplicable, she thought. But a small, unwelcome part of her recognized the persistent shiver knitting its way down her spine. She walked towards the small diner that had been suggested for coffee, a local hotspot for gossip and information. As she entered, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls that had just come out of the oven. The bustling diner was filled with chatter, punctuated by laughter, but Clara noticed there was an undercurrent of caution, the way the patrons glanced at her as she walked in, conversations quieting to whispers. "Welcome," said a cheerful voice from behind the counter. A stout woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile wiped her hands on her apron as Clara took a seat at the bar. "What can I get you, hon?" "A coffee, please," Clara replied, her editor's order echoing in her mind. She needed this article to pull her back into the spotlight. As the woman poured a steaming cup, a man in the corner caught Clara's attention. He sat hunched over a newspaper, though he appeared more interested in the world around him than the articles on the page. A heavy bearded figure with ink-stained fingers, his brows furrowed deeply as he scrutinized her, a look she quickly learned was not uncommon in town. "New in town?" he grumbled as Clara sipped her coffee. Just investigating a few stories, she offered politely. Came to learn about the, disappearances. The diner fell quiet, a collective inhale, and Clara felt eyes boring into her from every direction. The bearded man scoffed, folding his arms defiantly. You sure you want to do that? I have to admit I'm intrigued, Clara replied, determined to probe. Could you share what you know? He hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. Some things aren't worth digging up, lady. The woods hold secrets that would be better left alone. You, an outsider, might not understand. Maybe not, but I'm here to listen, Clara said, steadying her resolve even as her heart began to race. With a reluctant sigh, he nodded, his gaze shifting to the front windows where the pines swayed in a gentle wind, as if alive. There are tales of the cursed pines around here. Folks say that when the moon is full, the woods demand a sacrifice, a price paid in blood. People go missing, and the truth is, they don't always come back. The diner felt impossibly silent now, something thick and heavy pressing down on them. Clara peered into the man's face, searching, but he had turned back to his newspaper, impenetrable. Another patron nearby had leaned in, her voice almost a hiss. You don't know what you're inviting by probing into things you don't understand. A frost crept around Clara's heart, just as a chill brushed through the open door. The stories of danger and the tales of sacrifice felt too vivid, too real. Not folklore, she realized, but shadows of a darker history gripping the town. Please, Clara said, her voice taking on a serious timbre. I'm not afraid of ghosts or legends. With an eerie laugh, the woman shook her head. It's not just legends, sweetheart. You'll wish you had feared them when you see the truth. She glanced towards the deepening twilight, the horizon enveloped in an ominous hue. Beware the whispering pines. They're always listening. Clara watched the diner's door swing gently against the frame, leaving her enveloped in an atmosphere laden with warnings. As she finished her coffee and set down a few crumpled bills, determination pushed her forward. She had come here to unravel a mystery, one that had shaken Elmswood to its core. But now, as she stepped out into the cooling air, it felt like she was stepping into a web of dark secrets that wove through the cursed pines surrounding the town. The shadows deepened even further, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her from those trees, waiting for her to probe deeper into a story that was not just history but a lurking reality. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Forest. The twilight deepened as Clara walked along Main Street, trying to shake off the palpable tension she had felt in the diner. The shadows cast by the pines seemed to stretch further as the last vestiges of sunlight slipped away, and she felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. She remembered the bearded man's warning and the woman's ominous whisper about the cursed pines, but the journalist in her was ignited with a fierce curiosity that urged her onward. Despite the warnings, she found herself drawn to the edge of the forest, where the towering pines stood like ancient guardians, their dark silhouettes sharp against the approaching night. Clara knew that to truly understand the mysteries haunting Elmswood, she needed to go straight to the source. Her camera beckoned her to capture the eerie beauty of the trees, anything that could help weave the tale of despair that gripped the town. She took a deep breath and stepped onto a narrow trail that wound its way into the forest. The ground was soft, the pine needles muffling her footsteps as she ventured deeper. The vibrant greens of day faded, giving way to the muted pallor of dusk, where shadows danced and the air felt thicker. A sense of unease coiled tightly within her, but determination pushed her forward. The whispering of the pines began, soft rustles in the wind that sounded almost like voices, beckoning, warning. Clara lifted her camera to capture the moment. As she framed a shot, she thought about the stories behind those trees, lives intertwined with the folklore that had woven itself into the fabric of the town. She could almost imagine the townsfolk gathering here centuries ago, under a full moon, sharing tales of spirits and curses meant to scare children into obedience. Just a story, she whispered to herself as she clicked the shutter, putting faith and logic over fear. Yet with each snap, she felt as if she was unearthing truths that were best kept hidden. Deeper she wandered, until the trees closed in, creating a canopy that blocked out the light and cast the world below in deepening shades of blue and black. As she paused to adjust her camera settings, an unsettling sound reached Clara's ears, the faint echo of laughter. The air turned icy, and she froze, half expecting to turn and find others hiding behind the trunks, lost in mirth. But no one was there, only the rustle of leaves and the oppressive silence that seemed to follow on its heels. Clara shook her head, chastising herself for letting her imagination run wild. She resumed her path, her thoughts tethered to the inexplicable feelings gnawing at her. After what felt like an eternity, Clara stumbled upon a small clearing bathed in silver moonlight. In the center, an ancient stone altar lay draped in vines, overgrown but radiating an unsettling presence. The stones were dark, cold to the touch, and seemed to hum with a history all their own. Tentatively, Clara approached the altar, her fingers brushing over the etched symbols that adorned its surface. They appeared almost like runes, twisting and coiling in patterns that defied her understanding. She pulled out her notebook, excited to document the discovery, a possible connection to the very legends that had drawn her here. Her heart raced at the thought that she was on the brink of uncovering something significant. Suddenly, the night air seemed to change. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, breaking the silence with ferocious intensity. The trees groaned above her, their branches swaying dangerously as if warning her to leave. Clara shivered under the sudden chill, a sense of foreboding creeping up her spine. With shaky hands, she took a few photos of the altar, unwilling to retreat just yet. But then she noticed something that made her breath hitch, a small trinket resting on the altar, partially hidden by accumulated leaves and dirt. It was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a pine cone, glinting as moonlight danced across its surface. Clara reached down to pick it up, feeling an inexplicable connection to the piece. As she cradled it in her palm, the laughter from earlier returned, echoing hauntingly through the trees. This time, however, it was different. It felt darker, more sinister, as though it was mocking her intrusion. Suddenly, a voice pierced through the haze of her thoughts, clear and crisp. "You shouldn't be here." Clara whipped around, heart racing as her gaze met a figure emerging from the shadows. The figure of a young woman with tousled hair and eyes gleaming like embers. Her expression was both intrigued and disapproving. "Who are you?" Clara managed, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Mara," the woman answered, stepping closer but keeping a cautious distance. "And you're trespassing on sacred ground." Clara hesitated, debating whether to keep the pendant or relinquish it to this unexpected guardian of the woods. "I'm just investigating the disappearances," she said, her voice steady despite the growing sense of alarm. "The stories about the pines. I'm here to learn." Mara's brows knit together, and she stepped closer, now studying Clara with a mixture of concern and resolve. "The pines keep their own counsel. Do you even know what you're inviting by meddling in their stories?" "I'm just trying to piece together the truth," Clara replied, her determination wavering but not extinguished. "Too many people have gone missing. Someone has to try to make sense of it all." "The truth is a heavy burden," Mara said softly, her eyes glinting with an intensity that caught Clara off guard. "Sometimes it's embedded in the pine needles and sometimes it's buried beneath the roots, a price that must be paid." Clara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the pendant in her palm. "What do you mean?" But Mara shook her head, an enigmatic smile flickering across her lips as she glanced toward the trees. "You'll find out soon enough. Just remember, not all stories are meant to be uncovered, and not all truths can be handled by outsiders." As she turned to retreat into the darkness of the woods, Clara called after her, but Mara disappeared, swallowed by the shadows. Alone in the clearing, with a pendant dangling from her fingertips like a chain binding her to a fate she struggled to comprehend, Clara felt the weight of her expedition settle heavily upon her. Was she invoking something best left untouched? She clutched the pendant tighter, heart racing against the deepening night, knowing she had crossed a threshold. As she retraced her steps back to the trail, an uncomfortable thought clung to her. Each whisper of the pines seemed to echo her name, as if they conspired to welcome her further into the cursed legend waiting in the heart of Elmswood. Chapter 3: The Shadows That Lingered. Clara stumbled through the dimly lit woods, the pendant still clutched tightly in her hand, its cold metal pressing against her palm. The forest enveloped her, a thick, suffocating blanket of darkness that felt alive, breathing alongside her. Each snap of a twig underfoot echoed ominously, as if the very ground beneath her feet whispered warnings to stay away. She finally emerged from the trees, the sharp edges of the clearing giving way to the familiar curve of Main Street. Relief washed over her as she stepped onto the pavement, but the unease in her heart remained. The diner, now brilliantly lit as shadows danced outside, beckoned her back. She needed answers. Clara pushed through the door, the bell chiming above her head, and immediately felt the warmth envelop her, a stark contrast to the chills she had faced in the woods. Most patrons kept their heads down, focusing on their food, but a few eyes turned toward her, the weight of her earlier conversation hanging heavy in the air. "Back already?" the woman behind the counter greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're brave to wander through those trees at night." "Or foolish," Clara responded with a tight smile, making her way to the bar. "The stories, they seem more real than before." The woman leaned closer, her voice low. "Did you find anything?" "There was a clearing," Clara began, her voice a whisper. "An altar with symbols on it. And I found this." She laid the pendant on the counter for the woman to see. The diner went silent, the atmosphere shifting as customers lifted their gazes. The woman's eyes widened, her expression morphing from curiosity to fear. "What did you say? You found that in the woods?" "Yes," Clara replied, her throat tightening. "A woman named Mara appeared out of nowhere while I was there. She warned me about the pines, about the stories they keep." The heavy tension seemed to swirl through the diner like storm clouds. The man from the corner table leaned in, his voice gravelly. "Mara? That's one of the names they whisper about. The ghost who protects the woods." "Ghost?" Clara echoed incredulously, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "Some say she was sacrificed long ago to appease whatever dark force hides beneath those trees," he explained. "Her spirit roams the woods now, trying to protect the living from what lies in the heart of the pines." Clara felt a mixture of disbelief and terror wash over her. "Are you saying Mara is real? That she's not alive?" "That's not a question for speculation, girl," the woman behind the counter interjected. "You should take that pendant and return it to the altar before it claims you too." "What are you talking about?" Clara pressed, confusion mixing with frustration. "The pines want balance," the man continued, a glint of somber understanding in his eyes. "Every time someone goes missing, it demands a return, a sacrifice to pay for the lives it has taken. This pendant has been part of that ritual. You've stirred up something by taking it." "I didn't know, I just thought," Clara faltered, the gravity of her actions pressing down on her like lead. "You should have listened to our warnings," the woman reminded firmly. "Those who disturb the balance often don't come back." The room turned back to hushed whispers and clinking silverware, leaving Clara feeling increasingly isolated. She clutched her notebook, thoughts racing. Was it too late to return the pendant? Would doing so truly appease whatever dark force existed in the woods, or would it plunge her deeper into a curse that entwined Elmswood? With a sudden determination, Clara decided she would go back. The pendant had already drawn her into the web of this story, but she feared the price could be too great. There was no turning back. She had to confront the truth of Elmswood's curse. After paying her bill but leaving the pendant behind with the diner's owner, Clara found herself standing outside again. The moon shone brightly, illuminating the path back to the heart of the pines. She could feel the anticipation in the air. The trees seemed to sway rhythmically, whispering her name with a chilling urgency. The moment she stepped onto the trail, night closed in around her, the world beyond practically fading to nothing. Unsettling shadows lurked, and the laughter she had heard before echoed once more. Clara couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes upon her, tracking her every movement like dappled sunlight through the branches. As she approached the altar, the air grew thick and electric. Distorted shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, and she could have sworn she felt a presence lurking just beyond the trees. Goosebumps prickled her skin as she traversed the ground she had walked only a short while ago, though it felt infinitely heavier now. "All right," Clara breathed, coming to a halt in front of the altar, heart hammering loudly in her chest. "I'm here to return."
Air to return whatever.
It is raining relentlessly, and every drop feels like a hammer hitting my brain. I am physically uncomfortable, but the icy terror that has taken up residence in my bones is much worse. A storm is raging. Standing outside the stark white emergency medical center, I attempt to understand what is happening. Inside the hospital, my son Jacob is fighting a seemingly invisible enemy while linked up to equipment. Yet, maybe we are both fighting the mystery of premonition. Accompanying him in emergency is Sarah, my wife. She possesses strength and logic. When I feel my mind spinning out of control, or when my past resurfaces to haunt me, she is the rock that I can rely on. At this very moment, I require her presence, but I also require this space outside, the separation from the clinical reality of the hospital and the terrible thoughts racing through my head. In my mind, the events of the past several hours unfold like a disturbing film. Sarah and Jacob were meant to be on a short vacation, while I was due on a business trip from Kansas to Arlington. We were supposed to board a plane, but by the time we reached near the gate, Jacob had fallen apart. His savant syndrome caused him to have these unprecedented bursts of insight and brilliance, making him an exceptionally clever, yet also disturbed, young man. But there are moments when everything becomes too much, and he just breaks down. Today was just another one of those days, but with an extra dose of something macabre. We were nowhere near the jet when he began screaming. The background noise of the airport was interrupted by his ear-piercing screech. With a horrified expression on his face, he writhed and clawed at my arms. With his eyes watering, he yelled out, "No, go!" The gate workers looked terrified and even demanded we get a doctor because he was so agitated. To be honest, I felt some relief. It was more than just his condition that prevented him from boarding the plane. Those were his sketches. A fixation with drawing had gripped Jacob for days. A plane, obviously a plane, though badly painted. On the underside, a rough depiction of water. And then, in the same sketch, a helicopter, likewise depicted in his uncomplicated juvenile manner, stood next to the plane. Then, the numbers and the words that made me shudder. 42 is bad. 42 is not good. I thought Jacob was experiencing a tantrum, and because I am 42 years old, I thought he was having a go at me. So, I threw out the drawings. I am burdened with knowledge about something that twists my gut and causes me to doubt many things. It occurred long ago, before Sarah and Jacob, when I had just graduated from college and was excited to go and begin my financial career in the Big Apple. I will always remember that in the past. I awoke very early, and I felt a heavy sense of foreboding, as if something terrible was about to happen. In my thoughts, the number 11 kept popping up in my mind. It was an irrational, uncomfortable sensation, not a rational thought. Reluctantly, I remained at home. A knot of worry tightened in my chest as I paced my apartment, called my new employer, and pretended to be sick. It was on September 11th, 2001. I was supposed to begin working at the North Tower of the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 11 was one of the planes that crashed into the building. I cannot describe the agony of that disaster. Some weeks later, I first met with Sarah, who was also frantic for a change. Far from the city that caused me such anguish and suffering, we relocated to Wichita, Kansas. I attempted to live a normal life, burying my past. Still, I was never truly free of the knowledge. It was like a latent germ of fear just below the surface. I couldn't help but notice the similarity as I stand now in the rain. A foreboding 42, Jacob's hysterical cry of no-go, and his artwork. Had he caught a glimpse of the future? Had he inherited my ill-fated gift? Right now, the already hazy streetlights are even more blurry as the rain picks up speed. On the other side of the road, I notice a man smoking a cigarette in a makeshift bus shelter. In the middle of my terror, the sharp aroma of tobacco lingers in the air, providing an odd solace. As I quietly murmur to myself, God, I need one of those. There is inside me an intense want to smoke, even though it had been years, maybe decades, since I had last done so. Whatever, I need to alleviate the crippling worry. With the rain clinging to my clothing, I hurry across the street to the shelter. The man who is around my age has wrinkles of middle age visible on his face, yet nevertheless exudes a friendly enough personality. The sound of my voice was raspy as I spoke. Pardon me. I really need to smoke, and my son is in the emergency department, so I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please, would you be able to assist me? He looked up from his phone for an instant, briefly diverted. An expression of understanding flashed across his features. Oh, absolutely, my friend. Sorry about your son. He pulled a cigarette pack out of his pocket and extended it to me. I took one. Using his cupped palm to protect the flame from the wind, he even lit it for me. I uttered a desperate thank you while taking a long breath. Although the nicotine stung my throat, it was a pleasant diversion from the nagging terror. "Rough night, huh?" "Zrinia," the man said. He then remained glued to his phone as he shook his head as he read something messaging from his cell. And he said, "Seems like a terrible accident. Over the Potomac River, an airplane collided with a helicopter. Like a punch in the stomach, the words landed on me. This made my body shiver. After a long pause, I uttered, 'Do we know the flight number?' A croak, hardly audible above a whisper, was all I could muster. His eyes lingered on his phone once more. He said, 'It appears the plane was operated by American Airlines. Flight 5342, Eagle. No one could possibly make it through that.' Oh my God, I thought to myself. This was the plane we were meant to board. Jacob rescued us. A wave of pure terror came over me. I fumbled with the power button on my own phone as I reached for it in my jacket. I had turned it off while I was in the emergency room. My phone came to life with a text message from Sarah. "Jacob is presently comfortable and doing fine. He hilariously claims that a white-haired man will deliver gifts to most cows before Christmas. The sky, maybe the world, will be filled with fireworks. Zero on the ground. Zero on the ground." And Sarah added jokingly, "Maybe Jacob is already getting into the holiday spirit." Whilst greatly relieved he is okay, I frantically wonder the meaning of Jacob's latest remarks. What does he observe? Are more calamities lying in wait, ready to be set loose? As constant as the rain, this question whirled about me. Jacob's foresights are becoming real. As you check your mail, you notice a letter that makes you stop in your tracks. Written on the front of the envelope is your full name with a heart around it. You slide your finger under the seal and rip open the envelope. You pull out the card inside, and your breath stops in your throat. Written in cursive on the front it reads, "I found you." Your head jolts up, and your eyes dart from left to right, looking for movement. Before you can even open the card, you sprint back to your house and lock the door. You press your back up against the door and sit down. How had he found you? They had said that it would be next to impossible. You feel the hot tears streaming down your face. From moving across the country, leaving behind your family, changing everything all for nothing, he had found you. You slowly open the letter. You wipe the tears out of your eyes and scan the paper. The letter reads, "You thought you could hide from me, didn't you? Thought that I'd never get you back. We are meant to be together forever. I'll see you soon. From your one true love." Your breathing gets heavy and you let the letter slip out of your hands and onto the tile below. As the paper turns in the air, you see more text on the back. "P.S. Don't bother trying to leave town again. I have eyes everywhere." You slowly reach into your pocket and pull out your phone. You open your contacts to Uncle Reynolds. You let the dial tone ring, and on the other end, you hear a voice. "Hello?" Reynolds says, "He found me again. He sent a letter. He's in town. He's going to take me. He said if I try to skip town again, he'll know because he has eyes everywhere. I need help." You say frantically, "You're going to be okay. We're going to get you out of there safe and..." Reynolds says before the line cuts out. You hear another voice come through, and just the sound of their breathing sends chills down your spine. "Hey, baby. So, I'm guessing you got my letter?" He taunts. You pull your legs to your chest and bite your lip to keep from screaming. "Not gonna talk to me today, huh? Well, that's unfortunate. Then I guess I'll do all the talking. Once I find you, we're going to go to a cabin up in the mountains, and that's where we'll stay. Forever, my darling. I don't quite understand why you try to run from me. I know you still love me. I can't wait to see you again. Maybe now I'll get to see my little bun in the oven. I'll see you soon. He chuckles, and the line picks back up to Reynolds. Are you okay? Does he have you? We're going to get you out of there. What happened? Reynolds asks. You suck a deep breath in, and once again, you feel the tears streaming down your face. You reiterate what occurred in the past few minutes to Reynolds, and you try to calm yourself down. You are going to be okay. Once we find him, he'll be taken into custody, and he won't be able to hurt you ever again. He said he's going to take my baby. You blurt out through your sobs. You are going to be okay. We'll be in town tomorrow morning. Just stay inside for the night and wait until we come to get you. Stay safe, Reynolds says again. He hangs up. You slowly stand up and go throughout the small house, locking all the doors and windows and drawing the blinds so that nothing can be seen from outside. You go to the kitchen and quickly grab some snacks and scurry off to your room. You set up a place for you to sleep in your closet and place a baseball bat beside your pillow. You lay down and pull the blankets up to your chin and try to calm your nerves. It will all be okay in the morning. Uncle Reynolds will save you, and he'll never be able to find you again. You reassure yourself. You lock the closet door, and eventually you fall asleep. You wake up to the neighbor's rooster's loud crowing next door. You open your phone to hundreds of messages from an unknown number. They read, I love you. Good night. Good morning, love. I can't wait to see how much you've grown. They're from him. You put your hands on your stomach and sigh softly. You feel a buzz and reach for one of the granola bars you brought with you the night before. You slowly stand up to stretch and open the door. You walk into the kitchen and open the fridge to pull out some pasta you'd cooked a few nights ago. You place it in the microwave and start a check of the house. You squint to look out the peephole of the front door, but there's tape over it. You run back to the kitchen, grab your pasta, and hurry back to the closet. You open your phone again. It's 9:30. You hear a knock at the front door and begin to stand up. You feel relieved. Uncle Reynolds is here, and this will all be over. You'll finally get to see your parents again, and everything will go back to the way it was. Something stops you as you hear more knocking. When Uncle Reynolds came to check in on you, he always texted you that he was at the house. You open your messages with Uncle Reynolds. The last message you'd received from him had been before you moved to this town. Your heart sinks and your blood runs cold. That's not Uncle Reynolds. You swiftly lock the door and pull the baseball bat closer to you. You open your contacts and see a voicemail from Reynolds. You turn the volume to 1 and listen to his voice. Hey, this is Uncle Reynolds, and I just wanted to say that we'll be there at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Sleep well, he states. You close the voicemail and check the time again. It's 9:33. You can feel your heart beating faster in your chest. You hear glass shattering and a voice echoing throughout the house. Come out, darling. I know you're here. Make this simple and leave your little hiding spot so we can get to the cabin quickly, he ordered. You freeze as you hear his boots stomping on the kitchen tile. You quickly message Reynolds, but the message won't go through. Your tears begin to fall onto your phone screen, and all you can think about is how you'll never see your family again. He'll take you to his cabin, and you'll never be able to leave. You hear cabinet doors closing loudly in the kitchen. You try to send the message again, but the texts refuse to deliver. It's 9:38. The stomping of his boots seems to have gotten closer as you hear them against the creaky floor of the bathroom near the front room. You've never been very religious, but you begin to pray as his yelling gets louder. You hear him open the door to the nursery, and his yelling calms for a moment as he opens all the drawers, nooks, and crannies of the room. You hear him right outside your bedroom door, and everything in your body is keeping you from screaming for help. You hear him trying to open the door to no avail. You hear him kicking it until finally the wood gives way and the door opens. You see the shadow of his feet in the crack under the door. You see pillows and blankets being tossed to the floor along with glass picture frames that shatter the minute they hit the ground. Glass shards fly everywhere, including under the door, where they come to a stop by your feet. You hear him begin to yell and swear in frustration. You hear him walking around the room until finally he stops in front of the closet. He chuckles. "I found you, darling. Why don't you just come on out and play, huh?" You hear him begin to kick the door, trying desperately to get in. Somewhere nearby, you hear a loud commotion. What now? He grunts. You hear multiple pairs of boots getting closer as he continues kicking at the door. The kicking stops, and you hear multiple voices screaming and yelling. You hear a battering ram at the closet door and cover your face so splinters won't hit you. The door flies open and light streams into the small closet. You move your hands away from your face to see a tall, black man standing before you. He squats down to you and places his hand on your shoulder. "I'm Detective Adams. We have him in custody. You're okay." He smiles at you. You look behind him and see at least 15 officers around the room gathering broken items and placing them into clear plastic bags. You take his hand and he helps you to stand. Behind him is Uncle Reynolds. He pulls you against him and you feel tears of pure joy streaming down your face as he hugs you tightly. You pull apart and see that he too is crying. We have him in the back of one of the high-security vans, and he's going to be escorted to prison where he'll stay for a long time. You're safe now. You'll be able to go back home, and you'll be released from witness protection. You'll no longer have to call me Uncle Reynolds, he states. You will always be Uncle Reynolds to me. Thank you, Agent. You smile as he escorts you to his car outside. You breathe a sigh of relief as it sets in that you'll never have to see Christian again. You are free. As I entered the house, I noticed that something was wrong. There were no cries of "Manda, Manda," coming from my twin 2-year-old siblings as they rushed to greet me and hug my legs. No kiss from Mom to bat away as she took my backpack saying, "Amanda, what happened today in school?" No random advice or tidbit from my 15-year-old sister, Emily, ran out of our room and grabbed my hand to pull me in and show me something. She was a year older than me, but we felt like twins. No whir of the overhead fan. The foyer was completely empty. This never happened. The last time was 2 years ago when Father got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was going to die. They had all rushed to the hospital, forgetting to tell me it had been for no use, though. He had died anyway. Oh, no. I thought, who is it now? Not Mom, right? Oh, not Mel, please. Oh, God, please let it not be one of the twins. If something happens to Gianna or Greggy, I don't know what I'll do. I turned the corner into the living room slowly, bracing myself for what I might see. What I saw was not at all what I'd expected, but it was bad nonetheless. The green, as we called it, was gone. The green, the center of our lives. It used to sit proudly on the mantel, visible from everywhere in the house but the foyer. Daddy had carved it by hand. For 3 years, he would sit by the fire after work, his hands nimbly molding the clay, shaping something. We never knew what it was. Never will, since he's gone. Our pride and life. Gone. What happened? Where is it? Who took it? When? Why? Why? What will we do without it? The thoughts rushed through my head, making me dizzy. Somebody coughed and I turned. There, sitting on the couch, were my family members. First, I was overjoyed that they were okay. Then, I remembered the green and saw the expressions on their faces. Oh, what happened next, though, was the most shocking of all. They stood up simultaneously and enveloped me in a hug. What's going on? I cried, pushing them all away. Emily was the only one who responded. Nothing, dear. Just close your eyes. Just as we did, give all of your prized possessions to the king. Surrender yourself to him, just as we did. You will attain true happiness. She droned flatly. She never called me dear. What? Who's the king? Are you okay? Blink twice if you need my help. She wordlessly pointed at the corner, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A man, dressed all in black, with a hat over his face, leaning on the wall. What? What was he doing here? How had he gotten in? Who was he? What? What was going on? Emily smiled briefly, as did the man, but his was different. Emily's was a fleeting reminder of something normal. His was maniacal and murderous. And then my world turned black as he lifted his hat, revealing not a face anymore, but a black hole, swirling and gurgling, hungry. My eyes started to blur, my body feeling limp. I started to run the other way, grabbing as many of my family's hands as I could, when he spoke. His voice was deep and rumbling, hypnotic. I turned to face him. I had to. There was a force pulling me towards him. Don't go. Stay. Don't you want the truth? Don't you want peace and happiness? The kind words didn't match the cold, calculating expression. The truth about what, anyway? But somehow I couldn't look away. Maybe it was his voice, or how his gestures seemed to be pulling me towards him, or how he seemed sad. I could never refuse someone who was sad. So I stayed, and I listened, until I didn't even know what he was saying. I just knew that I believed it, and I trusted him, and that he would do what was right. Then he snapped his fingers, and I was shocked back into the present. I looked around me, dazed. I didn't understand what was happening. Then the earth beneath me started to rumble, and the bamboo floorboards that Daddy had made years before, when he was apprenticing a handyman, cracked under our feet, and we all tumbled into a black pit. All but him. He hovered above us, cackling, the black hole replaced once again by a face, though this was no comfort, as the face was cruel and crazy. My family had returned to normal, and were crowding around me. He lifted his hands, and I saw a shimmer. I saw the green floating in the air in front of him. I reached towards it, trying to jump out of the hole, the pit of darkness and despair. But something was holding me down. I searched the eyes of the man, but they were emotionless, betraying nothing, like the trained assassins on a show me and Mel like to watch. What was it called? I don't know, but this was no time for such trivial thoughts. I doubted we'd even be able to watch TV after this was over, whatever this was. I saw our TV sitting right outside of the pit. The man, or the king, I suppose, noticed my gaze and pushed the TV in the pit with us. As I entered the house, I noticed that something was wrong. There were no cries of "Manda, Manda," coming from my twin 2-year-old siblings as they rushed to greet me and hug my legs. No kiss from Mom to bat away as she took my backpack saying, "Amanda, what happened today in school?" No random advice or tidbit from my 15-year-old sister, Emily, ran out of our room and grabbed my hand to pull me in and show me something. She was a year older than me, but we felt like twins. No whir of the overhead fan. The foyer was completely empty. This never happened. The last time was 2 years ago when Father got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was going to die. They had all rushed to the hospital, forgetting to tell me it had been for no use, though. He had died anyway. Oh, no. I thought, who is it now? Not Mom, right? Oh, not Mel, please. Oh, God, please let it not be one of the twins. If something happens to Gianna or Greggy, I don't know what I'll do. I turned the corner into the living room slowly, bracing myself for what I might see. What I saw was not at all what I'd expected, but it was bad nonetheless. The green, as we called it, was gone. The green, the center of our lives. It used to sit proudly on the mantel, visible from everywhere in the house but the foyer. Daddy had carved it by hand. For 3 years, he would sit by the fire after work, his hands nimbly molding the clay, shaping something. We never knew what it was. Never will, since he's gone. Our pride and life. Gone. What happened? Where is it? Who took it? When? Why? 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 What will we do without it? The thoughts rushed through my head, making me dizzy. Somebody coughed and I turned. There, sitting on the couch, were my family members. First, I was overjoyed that they were okay. Then, I remembered the green and saw the expressions on their faces. Oh, what happened next, though, was the most shocking of all. They stood up simultaneously and enveloped me in a hug. What's going on? I cried, pushing them all away. Emily was the only one who responded. Nothing, dear. Just close your eyes. Just as we did, give all of your prized possessions to the king. Surrender yourself to him, just as we did. You will attain true happiness. She droned flatly. She never called me dear. What? Who's the king? Are you okay? Blink twice if you need my help. She wordlessly pointed at the corner, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A man, dressed all in black, with a hat over his face, leaning on the wall. What? What was he doing here? How had he gotten in? Who was he? What? What was going on? Emily smiled briefly, as did the man, but his was different. Emily's was a fleeting reminder of something normal. His was maniacal and murderous. And then my world turned black as he lifted his hat, revealing not a face anymore, but a black hole, swirling and gurgling, hungry. My eyes started to blur, my body feeling limp. I started to run the other way, grabbing as many of my family's hands as I could, when he spoke. His voice was deep and rumbling, hypnotic. I turned to face him. I had to. There was a force pulling me towards him. Don't go. Stay. Don't you want the truth? Don't you want peace and happiness? The kind words didn't match the cold, calculating expression. The truth about what, anyway? But somehow I couldn't look away. Maybe it was his voice, or how his gestures seemed to be pulling me towards him, or how he seemed sad. I could never refuse someone who was sad. So I stayed, and I listened until I didn't even know what he was saying. I just knew that I believed it, and I trusted him, and that he would do what was right. Then he snapped his fingers, and I was shocked back into the present. I looked around me, dazed. I didn't understand what was happening. Then the earth beneath me started to rumble, and the bamboo floorboards that Daddy had made years before, when he was apprenticing a handyman, cracked under our feet, and we all tumbled into a black pit. All but him. He hovered above us, cackling, the black hole replaced once again by a face, though this was no comfort, as the face was cruel and crazy. My family had returned to normal and were crowding around me. He lifted his hands, and I saw a shimmer. I saw the green floating in the air in front of him. I reached towards it, trying to jump out of the hole, the pit of darkness and despair. But something was holding me down. I searched the eyes of the man, but they were emotionless, betraying nothing, like the trained assassins on the show me and now like to watch. What was it called? I don't know, but this was no time for such trivial thoughts. I doubted we'd even be able to watch TV after this was over, whatever this was. I saw our TV sitting right outside of the pit. The man, or the king, I suppose, noticed my gaze and pushed the TV in the pit with us. I was trapped. Alone in the throne room, I paced, as I'd been doing for nearly 2 days now. The main doors before me were barred, but the force continually pushing against them was immense, and the snarling roar from the other side was deafening. The masses in the corridor outside were getting close to breaching. The sturdy portal of oak and iron heaved in and out, giving the appearance of breathing, a false hope of life. There was only death waiting behind those doors. Anxiety escalated, and my heart raced, feeling as if it would burst from my chest. I again surveyed the room for a means of escape. My gaze fell upon the meticulously carved granite statues of the griffins that sat upon pillars of polished marble. They lined the red carpet that ran the length of the room, beginning at the main doors to end at the jewel-encrusted throne, topped with its twin golden griffins facing off, claw to claw and beak to beak, above pillowed cushions of red velvet. I wished, as I had many times before, that I could fly away on one of those majestic beasts, or that they would come to life and aid me in the upcoming fight. I laughed at the thought. If they'd done so, they would have most likely eaten me anyway. Banners of red velvet hung from the walls on all sides, embroidered with the symbolic gold griffins that matched those on the throne. Massive columns of stone were positioned in 2 rows down the center of the room, supporting an arched ceiling towering high above. Tables and benches lined the walls. 2 service doors, one on either side of the room, were also barred and further barricaded with furniture hastily piled against them. The scratching and banging sounds from outside growing ever more intense. There could be no escape through either. Soon the doors would give way, and the throne room would be flooded with the hungry dead, teeth gnashing at my throat and talons tearing at my flesh. I was weak from hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. I hadn't slept, and my powers were waning. My time was fleeting, and I began to accept my impasse. I welcomed my deserved end, and I was ready for the nightmare to be over. I could do nothing more to stop it. I'd long considered my fate in the hours that had passed, wondering if I would starve first or be eaten. I'd wrestled with which I preferred. It's surprising what goes on in your mind when death is certain and you've ample time to think about it. Now, as the doors groaned and the hinges creaked. I worried less about lack of food, the events that led me here repeating themselves in my head. My thoughts recalled the beginning of this madness, and worse, to how I'd helped bring it about. I should have stopped Borlos, but instead I aided. He was my friend, and I was foolishly honored when he asked for my help. I knew the magic he sought was far beyond his skills, yet I said nothing. My bond of friendship may have caused the end of my kingdom, and the horror unleashed has me to blame. Borlos wanted vengeance for the way the king laughed at his request to wed his daughter. I could never explain her attraction. He was an ogre of a man, twice her size and twice her age, and she was beautiful, but they were in love. I'd suspected some magic spell or potion was involved, but I never asked. However, that's not what concerned the king. Borlos wasn't of noble heritage, and that's why he was laughed at. When the king refused what he'd considered a ludicrous request, he insisted that the only way Borlos could marry Eshtel was over his dead body. The king and nobles laughed hysterically at this. That's when Borlos knew what he had to do. He couldn't beat the king in the challenge of single combat, and he dare not strike him down using magic, as he would surely be a suspect. So, he plotted something far more covert and sinister for the king. The magic Borlos wished to use would require assistance, for it was dark and unpredictable. He had no experience in the art of necromancy. Borlos was a friend and a mentor to me, and I was someone he could trust. He came to me for help. I owed him both as a friend and colleague, so I agree. I didn't understand how my specialization in pyromancy would be of any benefit, but I stood by his side for moral support, if nothing else. Now, I realize helping him was a mistake. Neither of us truly understood the powers we were wielding. We were simple children toying with magic far more powerful than we could fully comprehend. Borlos and I studied spells based on the writings of powerful necromancers we knew far too little about. We searched ancient texts and read scrolls older than the kingdom itself, and found a way to administer a terrible and deadly curse in the form of a potion. Borlos wanted to inflict pain upon the king, and the necromantic elixir we created would damn him to a restless afterlife, forcing him to walk the lands as a spirit, suffering in never-ending sorrow and despair. Borlos insisted the king was deserving of such an end. He wanted to make sure that even after death, the king would bear witness to the fate of his daughter and of his family's lineage. He wanted the king to watch as Eshtel lived her life in the arms of the man he so scorned. As the court mage, Borlos was always seated at the dining table of the king during any formal event. He used that to his advantage, and during the great harvest feast, when the king rose and walked out to the center of the hall to address his people, as he always did at such gatherings, Borlos added the tasteless and odorless toxin to the king's ale, while all eyes were on the king. By the meal's end, the king slumped over into his plate and died. As an advisor to the court and the chief physician, it was easy for Borlos to explain the aging king's death as one of natural causes. The hastily prepared funeral, organized by Borlos, happened the very next day. The palace was packed with citizens paying their respects to a beloved king. Those who could not fit inside the palace gathered outside the castle walls. The vast city was virtually deserted everywhere outside the palace grounds. Borlos hurried everything along, and I didn't understand then, but I know now why he wanted to quickly get the body locked away in the royal tomb. Vorlos knew more about the curse than he'd revealed to me. He'd lied about one small detail. The king would be damned to rise from the dead, but not as a ghostly apparition. For Vorlos, his celebration of vengeance and upcoming marital bliss swiftly ended. Eshtel was more emotional over her father's death than Vorlos had anticipated, and she refused to leave the fallen king's side. She clung to the purple and red silks that decorated her father's funeral dais, bawling and blubbering, refusing to subside in her lament. No matter how hard the mage tried to convince her to come away with him, her love of family outweighed whatever enchantment he may have cast on her. While sobbing, head upon her father's chest, Eshtel let out a terrific scream. She insisted her father had moved, that the king still lived. A hush fell upon the crowd as the king sat up. His skin was pale gray, and his eyes black discs void of soul. He slid off the funeral dais and stood before his daughter, his mouth half open, drool dribbling down his chin. Eshtel cried and moved to hug her father, but Vorlos grabbed her arm, begging her to run. It was too late. The king grabbed Eshtel and sunk his teeth deep into her throat. Her scream became a gurgle as a torrent of blood spilled from the wood on her neck. Vorlos quickly began an incantation to defend Eshtel and himself, but the creature that was once the king moved at lethal speed and was on Vorlos, knocking him to the floor and raking his face with razor-sharp talons. His screams were silenced quickly in a spray of crimson and ribbons of torn flesh. Before anyone realized what was happening, Eshtel stood up. The crowd near her gasped in relief, and someone shouted that the princess was not dead. She pounced on the nearest nobleman and tore him to pieces. The frenzied crowd fled in all directions. Hysteria ensued. I moved into position behind a row of the king's pike and prepared my magic while they shielded me from the swarming chaos. The dead fell and rose again quickly. It was a bloodbath of horror, and the dead soon outnumbered the living. I fell back toward the main door as the line of soldiers before me were quickly overwhelmed by the creatures. Standing at the entrance to the great hall, hands waving, fiery magic swirling in the air around me, I formed a blazing whirlwind into a ball and thrust it forward into the room. Anything in the path of my fireball, dead or not, was incinerated as it pushed through the crowd. The creatures on the fringes were set ablaze, screeching and running in all directions. But even given all the power I could muster, the fireball did not slay them all. Dozens of scorched undead remained and came full speed toward me. I slipped into the hall and aided the soldiers already trying to shut the doors. The undead were faster than we were, and they pushed heads, arms, and legs into the gap before the doors fully closed. We hacked away at necks and limbs to clear the opening, but more were thrust forward. The soldiers panicked and began to flee, and the fight was quickly lost. The halls filled with terror and slaughter. More and more soldiers and citizens were overcome, adding to the ranks of the dead. I ran. I had to stay ahead of the tide of death that now spilled out in all directions. Navigating the halls of the palace as quickly as I knew how, I kept moving. I used secret passages known to few and positioned myself in places of opportunity to cast spells of flaming death upon the cursed as they moved through the corridors. I tried to reduce the numbers of the dead and slow the horde, but the slain rose again so quickly that my efforts were in vain. It became apparent after a short time that I was fighting the battle alone. I ceased to see any soldiers or citizens, and the screams of terror were replaced by the growls and snarls of the dead. The fight was lost. I ran toward the armory. I remembered that there was a way out through a secret panel there. Kings had used the exit in years past to sneak into town and visit the brothels. Secrets best kept from the queens. I could use it to get out of the palace, and if lucky, I'd be able to make it outside the walls to safety before the massacre spread further. I needed to warn others. I was determined, and I moved with great haste. But I encountered the dead at every turn. They were blocking my path to the armory and forcing me to the far end of the palace toward the throne room. Turning the corner, I saw that the double doors of the throne room were closed, and the dead were already blocking my path. The corridor behind me was filling up quickly with the savage creatures. My last option was to make it to the service entrance on the south side. I never remember running so fast in all my life as I did then. I made the door, entered, and slammed it shut, barring it behind me. Then I looked around the room, and much to my surprise, it was empty. I rushed to the north side of the room and quickly barred the door. Then I checked the main doors and found that they had already been barricaded from within. Someone had thought to make a stand here too, and then abandoned that hope. My stomach tightened, and I felt sick. I wondered if this would be the end for me. There was nowhere else to run. I barricaded the side doors with furniture and anything else I could find. The banging and scratching outside the doors continued. I had no food or water. A little time is all I had left. My attention returned to the present as the doors heaved inward, and this time the iron bar that held them buckled under the pressure, and the oak began to splinter. The hinges popped on the right, and then the entire door crashed inward. The first wave of the dead that entered the room simply fell to the floor. Their bodies were crushed into grotesque deformities by the weight of the masses pushing behind them. The second wave, nearly as broken as the first, crawled over the heap of mangled corpses on the floor, sliding over them and becoming entangled in the shattered remains. The sluggish flow of the mangled dead into the room bought me time to react. Hands waving above my head, I summoned a circle of green eldritch fire and willed the flames to rise. A blazing wall of magic surrounded me, towering 10 feet tall. I cast bolts of flame and orbs of fire at the gaping entryway as the dead flooded in over a heap of bodies. Many were engulfed by fire, screeching and burning, but still they came forth, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh and blood. With a loud crack, the north service door gave way to a similar scene, as did the one on the south wall shortly thereafter. The creatures poured into the room like mud through a fissure. Those still intact, able to walk or run, climbed over the mashed dead and stormed the ring of fire. They charged against the magic flames headlong to their doom, bursting aflame as they hit the wall, only to fall in a blazing pile before it. The carnage grew as the swarm filled the room, and the smell of burning flesh was overwhelming. The dead climbed the fiery corpses, and as they perished in flame, others climbed them. Quickly, the top was reached, and a scorched creature fell into the circle. My defense had failed, so I decreased the diameter of the circle, consuming the creature before me in flames. It charged forth in its final moments, and I drew the short sword from the scabbard on my belt and dispatched him with a thrust to the throat. The thing fell before me, hair and skin crackling in the flames. Others were hitting the wall, and the fallen dead were quickly filling the trench created when the ring shrank. The burning bodies piled high again. This time, 2 vaulted over the top. I had but one trick left. I constricted the wall of fire until it encompassed me. I stood in the center of the flaming heap of the dead as a final blazing pillar of destruction. I was immune to my own magical fires, but all the dead that reached for me perished in flames, and I laughed at how I had outdone them. The dead piled at my feet, increasing the size of the barrier around me. It pushed inward as it rose. I panicked. I could not move, locked in place, surrounded by the smoldering dead. Thoughts of being buried alive flirted with my mind, and that is when I looked up and realized that as tight as I'd constricted the circle around me, it was still a circle. From the top of the mound, a burnt face poked through the chimney of fire and slid into the tube above me. I held my sword high and impaled the creature, but the weight bore down on me. I needed both hands to push the thing away, but the walls of burning corpses were too high around me, and my concentration was faltering. I tried to hold. Then a second burning creature slipped into the tube, and then another. I fell to a fetal position in the little space I had left at my feet. The pressure mounted as more of them piled on top of me until I couldn't breathe. My concentration was lost. My power was spent, and the summoned flames flickered out. In one last-ditch effort to survive, I fought my way up and out of the pile of bodies. My skin burned, and my hair singed in the heat. I realized my sword was lost beneath me as I punched my arm through the corpses and managed to pull myself up far enough to get my head free. I tried to push the smoldering bodies aside, and then I felt the pile shifting and moving around me. Slowly, a vision of horror surrounded as the dead climbed to the top of the pile. The blood-stained faces, broken flesh-ridden teeth, and soulless blank stares of the dead were gathering to finish me. With my one free hand raised over my head, I proudly presented my middle finger in defiance as their ravenous jaws descended. Tim Porter was a simple man, quiet, kind, caring, and hardworking. He lived in a modest cottage in the small mountain town of Manitou Springs, Colorado, with his wife of nearly 34 years, Kiara Porter. While Tim was growing up in Southern California with his parents, who had recently immigrated from Venezuela, Kiara was being raised in an orphanage, learning about her indigenous ancestors of the Sioux tribe. Since Kiara was usually a well-behaved child, her older brother could visit her often to tell her about their parents, who had been killed while protesting for Native Americans' right to vote. Tim has always been fascinated by her family's strong and courageous history, and would often tell her she grew to become just as brave, as if it were embedded in her genes. Tim was a quiet child, the youngest of 7. His parents taught them all to keep their head down and not make trouble, a warning he kept in the back of his head his whole life. Tim never minded his quiet way of living. Kiara, being a county prosecutor, was plenty of excitement for him. Their friends have always known them to be the perfect couple, and while Ciara insisted there's no such thing, that all healthy relationships, romantic or otherwise, are perfect in their own right, Tim always silently agreed with them. Ciara always found it strange that Tim woke up every morning thanking God aloud that he was fortunate enough to still be with the love of his life. But she never denied him his faith and would let him happily believe he married the absolute perfect human. Every morning was exactly the same for him, and that Saturday was no different. Kiara had left for work for the day. Knowing it would be another long day for her, Tim decided to deep clean the house, starting with the attic. Tim never kept things in the attic. If there was an item they no longer used, he would donate it to the local thrift store as soon as he had the time. He hadn't gone into the attic in years and never knew Kiara to go up there either. It must be extremely dusty, possibly filled with insects, he thought. After first cleaning the finished basement, living room, and kitchen, he ventured up the pull-down, foldable stairs. "They aren't as dusty as I thought they would be," Tim remarked to himself as she stepped on the first step of the rickety wooden structure. Shrugging it off, he continued to the top and pulled the light bulb's dangling string. He let his eyes adjust to the light before he noticed something odd about the room. A lone picture frame next to a rectangular object covered with a once white sheet with footprints leading up to them, placed deliberately underneath the one small window. Curiously eyeing the two items, he approached them following the footprints. Tim reached for the sheet, surprisingly clean, and whisked it away to reveal a large, dark blue trunk with gold metal accents. Fancy, he thought, but what is this for? He stared and pondered for a minute, coming to his conclusion that Kiara must be hiding something in here, specifically an anniversary gift. Their 34th was coming up in a few days after all. Filled with excitement, Tim overeagerly reached out to open the trunk, but it wouldn't budge. Locked tight, he thought. Thinking quickly, he went through all the possible areas Kiara could hide such a key. Before heading down to the spots he thought of, a ray of sunlight bounced off the picture frame. Looking closely at it for the first time, Tim realizes there's a photo inside, one that shows him and Kiara many years ago in hiking clothes on a scenic mountainside, one of the shortest in the Rockies. Immediately remembering the events of that day 34 years ago, he pulled out his phone and texted Kiara, "Hey, sweetie, do you remember that day 34 years ago when we went on that hiking trip?" Tim put his phone back in his pocket and proceeded to wander the house, checking every nook and cranny for the trunk key. Kiara responded to his text with the exact date of the trip. Tim looked at his phone puzzled, since she usually is terrible with remembering specific dates. How do you remember the date? Kiara left him on read. He texted again. "Never mind, but you remember what happened." Tim enjoyed the memory quite a bit, as it was one of the more romantic trips they took. At the time, they were 10 months into their relationship. Tim started to remember as he moved from the basement to search the first floor. It was a fall day, with the most beautiful array of colorful trees encompassing the whole valley and hiking trails, while just the right temperature for plenty of people to be out on the mountain. Tim rented one of the cabins towards the peak for them to spend the weekend at. The hiking trail they took was one of the easier ones that overlooked a large lake that the state maintained so well it still looked the same as it did back then in 1979. They passed by many people and even a few dogs. Kiara was excited as they passed a group of high school students. They prompted her to reminisce of the days when she had gone on class hikes in the mountains. Tim recalled how she suddenly got worried for forgetting her water bottle a few minutes later. Tim didn't mind, however. He wasn't as athletically inclined as Kiara, so he opted to stay on one of the benches to watch the lake while she headed back to the car. There were a few joggers out on the trail and even some mountain climbers. As they reached the cabin, Ciara informed Tim sheepishly how she didn't know they would be staying the weekend, and reminded him that they had put their trash bags in the trunk since the area was close by to the county garbage dump. "Don't worry, sweetie. You can go take those to the dump while I get the cabin ready," Tim said while he removed her backpack and handed her the car keys. While she was gone, he prepared a romantic dinner for the two of them, complete with red wine, cheesecake dessert, and a little diamond ring. Tim was so happy when she returned and surprised him fancy watch as she told him it was last minute for the surprise weekend getaway. After a few hours of determined searching, Tim found the key hidden, taped to the bottom of the nightstand on Kiara's side of the bed. He thought of how clever she always was as he removed it. Thoroughly excited, he rushed back up to the attic to open the dark blue anomaly. Tim stuck the key in the metal lock and twisted until he heard a beautiful little click. He enthusiastically opened the trunk to find a bunch of odd trinkets, small boxes, and some coin purses. He looked at them confused. They didn't seem like an anniversary gift, alone or together, nor did they seem like memorabilia of Kiara's. Tim had never seen any of these items before. 4 watches, 5 coin purses, 3 small boxes, 2 bracelets, 4 necklaces, a Letterman jacket, 8 scrunchies, even a purple heart medal, and a kid's jump rope. Tim felt uncomfortable as the room darkened, but he continued investigating the trunk's contents. He found 7 rings in one of the boxes, 12 ID cards in another, and 9 sets of keys in the last box. At the bottom of the trunk were newspaper clippings about the discovery of the bodies of 13 people. Tim's heart sank. After reading the newspaper articles, he took the coin purses out and carefully opened one before yelling and dropping it back into the trunk. They all were filled with several sets of human teeth of varying sizes. Tim looked back at the newspaper clippings and read the dates of each. Altogether, Tim realized they were about the deaths and discovery of 13 people, 6 women, 6 men, and a child. A wave of horror flooded his body as he recognized the day of the hiking trip back in 1979 as the same day a high school couple and a female jogger went missing, and the discovery of a male's body in the local dump, which was beaten beyond recognition. Tim rapidly flashed back to that day again. Everything has changed now. He picked out the high school couple from the group of students on a class hiking trip. After they passed, Kiara remembered she forgot her water bottle in the car. She took over an hour to return, yet he never questioned her. He recalled a female jogger stopping at the cliff to tie her shoe while Tim left Kiara to go into the outhouse nearby for a few minutes. Then they reached the cabin, and Kiara left to take what she called trash to the dump a few miles away, while he stayed at the cabin and prepared a romantic dinner for the two of them, complete with red wine, a cheesecake dessert, and a little diamond ring. Ciara came back with a gift for him, a fancy watch without its original packaging, or any packaging. Suddenly, Tim heard the front door opened and Kiara called out for him. Tim panicked and threw everything haphazardly back into the trunk and locked it. Thinking fast, he rushed down to the upstairs bathroom, locked the door, and turned the shower on. A few minutes later, Kiara knocked on the door. "Hey, when you're done in there, let's watch a movie and order Chinese." In the absence of his response, Kiara turned to head downstairs. Tim's mind was racing with his options. Leave her and never mention the trunk. Call the police and report her as the infamous Rocky Mountain serial killer who has been inactive for 23 years. Or pretend like nothing ever happened. Like those 13 people never existed. Tim didn't know them. What difference would it make? I can't, he thought. That's wrong. He loved Kiara, even still after finding the trunk. He knew what he wanted to do. Tim briefly showered the dust off him and changed into clean clothes. As he walked to the top of the stairs, he saw Kiara at the bottom, standing at the island in the kitchen, looking down at a menu for the local Chinese restaurant. He jogged down the stairs and approached her, reaching out to give her a hug, but stopped dead in his tracks as he saw the knife she was holding. "You cleaned today," Kiara said, smiling. "Thank you for doing that. You know I love when the house is clean." "I do." Tim searched her face for any hint, any indication of what she was thinking. Then it hit him. He didn't fold the stairs back up. "But you missed a spot," she said, turning to face him and slowly dropping her smile. "The attic." "Kiara, what's in the attic is none of my business. Now, what do you want to order tonight?" "No, it is your business." She started walking toward him. "You made it your business when you opened my trunk." "It's not. You won't even let me explain. You just rather write it off like it's nothing, like I never did anything. Where are your morals?" "Where are my morals? You killed 13 people, Kiara. One of them was just a 9-year-old kid, a damn child. Yet, you came down here like you were willing to pretend you never saw it, like nothing ever happened?" "Yes," Tim almost whispered, starting to cry. Kiara stared at him, completely baffled. "Why?" "Because I love you." In that moment, Kiara's eyes began to change, and her body started shaking. A wave of tears flowed from them both. Tim walked forward. Kiara started to break down. "Don't. I can't." Kiara's words were stopped short as Tim let out a sharp gasp from the pain. "I don't have control over it." Tim lightly grabbed at her small wrist and looked down at their wedding rings. He knew he wouldn't be able to ask her why. He knew he would never get closure. Would the victims' families ever get closure? Or justice? Even as the blood dripped, one question still remained for Tim. The question Kiara asked rang in repetition in his head as tears continued to stream down her terrified face. "Do you still love me?" "More than anything," he said, hugging her and forcing the knife farther in. "More than anything in the world."